Slightly more than a year ago, in September 2017, I saw some friends playing Warframe. I didn't know what type of game it was, and indeed I didn't even know the game existed before that. I skimmed over the Steam page, and while the game looked interesting, the gameplay seemed like a generic third-person shooter, but with a faster pace. I checked the Steam tags and saw that the game is co-op, which is great since I'm always on the lookout for more co-op games, but I also noticed another tag, one which almost made me dismiss the game out of hand. Free to play. Now, I'm not saying free to play as a model is inherently a bad thing, but an increasing amount of free to play games I had tried before this felt more like they were designed to test my patience than to offer me a fun experience. I'm happy to say, however, that Warframe is definitely not this. It can be tricky to explain what type of game Warframe is, but if I had to describe it in one brief sentence, it would be 4-player MMO TPS, which sounds contradictory, but trust me, it makes sense if you don't think about it. There is a lot more to the game, of course, and in many ways Warframe breaks how genres are defined. There's PvE, and there's PvP, there's stealth, and there's hordes of enemies to shoot. There's linear corridors, and there's huge open worlds. It's about bullet jumping through a tight corner before nailing headshots while flying through the air, and it's Superman 64. It has all of these things, and yet at its core, Warframe is about reaching the highest master rank possible in the most enjoyable way. Your master rank is like your overall level, which you can increase by leveling Warframe's weapons, companion, R-Swing and R-Swing accessories. Higher ranks unlock things like more powerful weapons, more energy points for unranked stuff, more void trade capacity, higher standing cap and many other things. This is ingenious design because it gives you a long-term goal, a feeling of progression and growing stronger, and also encourages you to experiment with all the weapons and frames the game has to offer, instead of just looking up the most meta loadout there is and sticking with it until you're sick of it all. And the game does have a lot of content to offer, but don't expect to be blazing through it, as Warframe is very much a lifestyle type of game. In order to get the weapons, Warframes and all other things needed to increase your master rank, you'll first need to find the blueprints for whatever you're intending to build, which can be acquired directly if you have the resources, either in real life or in the game, or it can be part of a drop table. Once you have the blueprint, you can see what resources you need, and there's a chance it might require various parts as well. If it's a Warframe you're building, there will be blueprints for the parts, and those blueprints require their own resources. So in case it wasn't clear by now, Warframe is a game all about grinding, and if that's not your bag, then this game is probably not for you. The game is fairly generous with all of its resources, with the exception of two of them, credits and endo, both of which are required for the most important part of the game, the modding system. Mods are where the game gets the vast majority of its depth. They change the way your loadout works and how effective it is for various situations. For your Warframe, they affect your abilities by making them last longer, have more range, be more powerful, or be cheaper, with the occasional mod that changes how the ability works. There's also mods that affect your Warframe directly by boosting health, shields, armor, casting time, etc., etc., as well as in other minor ways. When it comes to your primary and secondary weapons, they boost your overall damage, makes you shoot more bullets, and coats your bullets in acids and gives more DACA. Depending whether your guns have more critical chance or status chance, there are mods that make you kill the enemy instantly or almost instantly. I have heard there is a third class of weapons, but unfortunately it has a pitiful amount of DACA, and so I have mostly avoided it. All Warframes have 8 normal mod slots, 1 slot for corrosive projection, even though the polarity doesn't always match at first, and 1 slot for power drift when you finally get an XLS adapter. Primary and secondary weapons only have 8 normal slots, while melee also have a slot for stances. Corrosive projection and stance mods gives energy capacity instead of taking it away, and matching mod polarity with the slot polarity will double capacity. If you use an Orokin reactor and the right aura on your Warframe, you will have 78 energy capacity to work with, which is usually enough for most builds. With so many slots and so many mods to work with, the possible combinations are practically infinite, and yet so many builds are exactly the same. This is less the case with Warframes, as you can have 2 completely opposite builds that are equally effective in their own way, but with weapons, their only purpose is to deal damage, and so the large majority of mods are practically mandatory. Now, a lot of people will tell you that mandatory mods are a bad thing because it reduces the build variety you can viably have, but I would like to make a case for the opposite. The most efficient builds will be dissimilar regardless, and having mandatory mods makes it easier for new players to get into the modding system. Say you're starting out, you finally have your first fully leveled gun with 30 energy capacity and you're wondering what mods you should use. You probably need not ponder long before concluding that the one mod that makes you do more damage is probably a safe bet. Assuming the mod is fully leveled, that's 14 energy points spent with 16 remaining. The second mod you'll probably want is the one that makes you shoot more bullets. That's 29 out of 30 energy spent, making no more room for any more building. Your weapon is now as good as it can be without upgrading and will be perfectly usable for the majority of the content the game can throw at you. But let's take a break from the technical stuff and talk about something everyone can appreciate, Warframe's endgame. You see, Warframe's endgame is where most of the content is at and what all the looting you've been doing is all about. It's where you really get to explore all the tools the game has been drip-feeding you so that you can finally be equal to or maybe even better than those people you saw when you were still Master Rank 1. You get to experiment with exciting attachments for your gear that really elevates and sharpens your arsenal. But to get a truly viable loadout for Warframe's endgame, you're gonna have to cough up some premium currency for those deluxe skins, color palettes and Cyandanas. Yes, you get the blueprint for some helmets and a handful of starting colors as well as a few seasonal palettes, but if you want just the right shades, the best skins or the most accessories, you're gonna have to pay a little. And if you want to really be on the cutting edge of competition, you have to pay the most premium of premium currencies for those primed accessories and the Tenogen skins. And you will need something really sharp to distract from the rest of the game, which looks far better than it has any rights to. I normally don't think it's worth mentioning since it tends to speak for itself, but Warframe is quite a dazzling game, especially when considering that it's free to play and with how frequently it is updated. Just graphically speaking, this bad boy can fit so many frames and pixels in it, animations are super slick even when slowed down to a tenth of a speed, and various body parts animate independently, which allows for interesting gameplay situations. There's a ton of settings, which, when turned off or set to low, allows the game to be played even on a potato, and when set to high makes the game look brilliant. In fact, you can turn the bloom so high up, when you go to the Plains of Eidolon at night, you can essentially recreate that one scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark. The environments and characters have a ton of details to them, a lot of frames have skin with physics, and if you like metallic textures, you're gonna love Warframe. This game has enough metal to put even Doom to shame. Since there's support for physically based rendering, most characters will look good regardless of lighting. Speaking of good looking characters, Warframe visual style is on point. Take a Hydroid as an example, specifically the Prime variant. His appearance is that of a pirate captain, and a wealthy captain at that, as evidenced by his golden trim. With his noble animation set, his idle posture exudes with brazen confidence and menace. His single-handed secondary idle shows him analyzing his situation before suddenly drawing his gun without any hesitation and probably no regrets if he has to use it. His two-handed secondary stance shows him holding each gun in a come at me type of way, almost as if to say, well, what is it? Hydroid's name essentially means water and is reflected by his abilities. His first ability makes his enemies' days worse, his second ability makes him and all his enemies simultaneously do the wave, his third ability makes Hydroid piss himself and get so embarrassed he just disappears, and his ultimate ability opens a Stargate to Japan. All of this is thematically appropriate and makes sense for his character, however his abilities do not have a lot of synergy and his playstyle as a result is a bit wishy-washy. Hydroid at his best is not a perfectly designed frame. I'd say there are no perfect characters in this game, but the majority of them is somewhere between good and great, which is pretty impressive considering that there are 37 unique frames to choose from and almost half of them have their own story. I don't have much to say about the writing of Warframe except that I don't think it's very good. It is what you'd expect from a power fantasy. You are Tenno, the one and only noble race in the entire universe. Never mind that you routinely commit genocide on the working man, the mentally handicapped and the local wildlife. Nah, you're a paragon of benevolence and everyone else is just out to destroy the galaxy in their own unique way, man. And that's the gist of the lore as far as you're involved. When it comes to the plot, it starts with you gaining control over your own body and ends with you collecting all the gear in the entire galaxy with a really immature plot twist halfway through, like, are you kidding me? You'd think with over 2,000 hours of playtime I would have a fairly solid grasp of the mythology at this point, but to be honest with you, I have no fucking clue about half of it. Who are the Orokin? What are sentients? Why are they allergic to vacuum cleaners? Who the hell is War and why won't he shut up? Maybe all of this would be a bit clearer if the storytelling wasn't split between retired events, codex, paragraphs, comics and quests and shuffled about a bit with a sprinkle or three of retcons on top. Profit! Needless to say, you do not play Warframe for the story, much in the same way you don't play Spec Ops The Line for the gameplay. Neither is bad, but at the same time it's not what you're there for. Warframe's writing in my eyes is a mess, though I commend Digital Extreme for trying to keep it comprehensible through all these updates and changes over the years. Digital Extreme does do a lot of things right, and I'm glad Warframe is such a big success, but there are things about the game I strongly disagree with, and an example of which is that the game is still in beta. Whether the game is fully released or not makes little difference, as nothing about the game itself would change, but using, or abusing rather, the beta label does come with certain consequences and responsibilities I doubt Digital Extreme has fully realized. For example, if the game is in beta, it would be reasonable to expect progress to be wiped when the game is fully released, and it would also be reasonable to expect the game being incomplete, somewhat unpolished and buggy. Considering it's been 5 years and a lot of people have bought a lot of stuff, progress will likely not be wiped, and while the game is fairly fleshed out and polished, Digital Extreme has a nasty habit of hyping the hell out of new content that inevitably disappoints for weeks if not months due to game-breaking bugs that kill the interest for new content and in turn defeats the whole point of the hype in the first place. And this has been a persistent problem with Warframe for a while now. New content gets rushed out in a buggy state in the name of beta, only to get a minimum number of band-aid fixes to call it playable, then dropped until it reaches a state of disrepair. It shows a pretty clear lack of planning on Digital Extreme's end, which is even more apparent with the game's biggest problem, power creep. While the game technically has co-op in that 4 players can work together against the game itself, there is little reason and rarely a chance to properly do so, since for the vast majority of the content there will be at least one player who is so effective that the rest will struggle to even keep up. Or that's what it's like in the early to mid game. If you know what you're doing, the transition from early to late game is both smooth and brief, effectively giving you 90% of the power in just 100 hours of active gameplay. At that point you might as well stick to whatever you feel like, since the only real challenges are sorties and the occasional events, both of which will have other players more than capable of carrying your ass should you need it. And this has been a consistent complaint about Warframe for a while now, that beside fashion, Warframe lacks any meaty challenges. This, in a way, is good, as it keeps the game casual and open for everyone, and at the same time bad, because it fails to reward all the grinding and hard work. A problem that is only compounded by the fact that new gear released has to be more powerful than previous gear in order to be exciting or relevant to more experienced players, to which a good example is Excalibur Umbra. When I first started playing Warframe, I had to choose between 3 characters, and for no particular reason I chose Excalibur. He is a frame all about melee, which I don't have much interest in, but is the strongest class of weapons in the game. He is not the best choice for any mission, but is a very solid jack of all trades. If you happen to be a founder of the game, you will have exclusive access to the Prime variant of him, and if you're not, then the base Excalibur was the only Excalibur available. Then comes the sacrifice to change things up a little. For the first time ever, there was a better version of Excalibur that everyone could get, but he isn't just a slight improvement, he might very well be the strongest frame to date. To start off, his stats are equal to the Prime version, which is roughly twice as strong as the base version, and stats are pretty much the only difference between Prime and non-Prime, but Umbra has a few more things going for him. He also comes with 3 Umbral polarities and 3 Umbral mods, which are stronger versions of the base mod, which only gets stronger when you have the full set equipped. Yes, other frames can use Umbral mods as well, but since they drain 16 energy points each and you cannot change a slot to Umbral polarities, they are tricky to make use of. Excalibur Umbra costs no resources, not even credits to make, and only takes 1 minute to complete. He comes with a free Warframe slot, he is already fully leveled, already has energy capacity doubled, and comes with an improved built-in weapon that also has 2 Umbral polarities and mods. And to top it all off and really hammer home how much better he is, he comes with a sex scarf. But as overpowered as Excalibur Umbra is, he's not the be-all and end-all of characters. Raw firepower can brute force a lot of problems, but Digital Extreme has designed around this with stuff like damage caps, alternate progression paths, multiple defense targets, and invincibility periods, which the bosses in this game integrate to various extents. There are 3 types of bosses in Warframe. The first type of bosses are the ones with no invulnerability or damage cap. These fights are over in literal milliseconds if you know what you're doing. This list includes fights like the Sergeant, Forid, the Jackal, etc. Not very engaging boss fights, but can be cathartic now and then. The second type of bosses are the ones that make you wait with nothing else to do. These are fights like Lieutenant Lakhrel, Vehek, and General Sargus Rock. These are the worst bosses the game has to offer, since how quickly they are over with is completely random and there's nothing the player can do while they are waiting for another opportunity to attack. And the third type of bosses are the actual good ones, those who always leaves you with something to do or a way to speed up the fight. There's the Raptors, which would be over with very quickly if all you had to do was shoot them dead and move on. But instead they drop a bomb upon death, which you have to grab and frantically drop into the right holes. If you didn't prepare for the fight and don't know how all the movement mechanics works, this fight will continue to be a challenge. But once you do learn the fight, it could be over before any of your teammates even show up to the arena. Another good boss fight for different reasons are the Ambulers. Again, the fight would have been over with very quickly if all you had to do was kill the boss, but when Ambulance goes down is when the real fight begins. You run to the back of the Ambulance and scramble to hack its console before the Ambulance gets re-enabled, and after the Ambulance are hacked you have to defend it until the timer reaches 0. With a tanky build and enough ammo, this is easy enough to do alone. It's when there's 2 of the damn things it starts to get really out of hand. But once you successfully defended enough of them, you win the fight. What's so great about this fight is that the gear you have isn't the ultimate factor in whether or not you'll win. You also require a fair amount of skill and a good understanding of the game mechanics, so the boss will continue to be a challenge no matter what level you are or the boss is, especially during sorties and their arbitrary requirements. And the fact that you have to grind for keys to start a mission, in my opinion, makes this boss fight the best in the game, as it forces you to mix up what you're doing, which in turn creates some great pacing. This boss design is a good example of Warframe's core gameplay at its best, and there should be far more content like it. And that is pretty much Warframe in a nutshell. I had a bunch more notes about the various systems, so I could talk about how pets are inferior to sentinels in almost every way, or how syndicates force you to make annoying choices despite the core gameplay being all about exploring, or even just talk about Sanctuary Onslaught. Hell, I could make a whole video just talking about that game mode, but really, everything I've said at this point could more or less be applied to that stuff as well. If any of what I've said in this video has convinced you to try the game, I have made a short video with tips for getting the most out of Warframe. Be aware that the learning curve is high and that you'll have to spend a fair while researching, but once you're casually mowing down hordes of enemies while listening to a podcast or whatever, Warframe will have hundreds of hours of enjoyable content to offer in return. Even after 2000 hours, there's still mods I want to collect, ribbons I want to improve, Baruketeer accessories I want to buy, etc. As for the future of Warframe, Digital Extreme has been adding more and more grinding with each update, and I disagree with the way they're heading. From the people I've spoken to, Warframe is not the type of game they play continuously over a long period of time. No, they prefer to play through the content that is there, and once they've caught up, put the game down for a while. Personally, my enjoyment of the game was peaking when I was in the process of collecting the last Warframes available and declined rapidly from there. Because I knew that once I had crafted all the frames, my next major goal would be to level all my gear, which is as repetitive and boring as playing Sanctuary Onslaught for hours on end, trying and failing to get the last piece of a mediocre frame just so that I can say I got it. As it stands right now, the core gameplay is all about shooting hordes of enemies, which is fine, but since that's mostly what you're doing, only a select few frames are relevant in the meta, and any new gear has to be more powerful to still be interesting to older players. And there's only so much power you can give before reaching a saturation point, and Warframe is dangerously close to that point already. If Digital Extreme wants to add new content in the future that is not strictly power creep but still interesting, I believe the game would have to go in a radically different direction, like adding building mechanics and logic-based machinery, somewhat similar to Minecraft. That might sound like an odd path for the game to take, but I'll remind you there's already resource gathering, mining and fishing. The Plains of Eidolon was a step in the right direction, but I understand it wasn't exactly polished when it first came out, and what is there is not particularly deep and doesn't have much interaction with the rest of the game. Personally, I'm not a very big fan of Plains. Yes, it's nice to dart around as Zephyr, mining and fishing can be relaxing and the bosses there have a lot of potential. Main reason I don't like it is because it just all feels so slapdash and shallow. The big open world is cool, but it's very flat and enemies are pretty boring and there's nothing to explore. It's just kind of there. Fishing is alright, if a little dull, and being interrupted all the time ensures there's always a little bit of tension, for better or for worse. When it comes to mining, it's basically a short game of hunt the thimble before timing the release of your fire button perfectly like one of those arcade games. Better than it used to be, but still not terribly engaging. Even Minecraft when it first came out had more engaging mechanics, which might not be the fairest comparison as it literally has mine in the title, but it was coded by one person in goddamn Java. Come on D, surely you can do better than this. I'm not expecting being able to carve out huge tunnels with a massive laser, although that would be fucking rad. Yeah, I think I would be alright waiting a couple years if that was the end result. I can't say I'm holding my breath for the issue with Plains of Eidolon to suddenly be fixed, however, as that would require a complete overhaul. Neither am I expecting Digital Extreme to suddenly change their approach to creating new content. That said, for 2 now, the new open world is pretty much an improved version of Plains in almost every way, and if those are the types of updates they choose to prioritize in the future, then I believe that is a good thing for everyone involved. And if nothing else, the new environment looks pretty darn sweet, and the trailer for it has given us possibly the most catchy song since Crazy Frog.
What's going on?